Okay, here we are, part two. And if you haven't already seen part one, I'd encourage you to do so because it really lays the groundwork for these times and talks about the deep transformation this country is going through. The Plutonian transit, which is a transformation of power and this nation's identity, a sentiment and extreme that seems to be coming from Bernie Sanders' side, and a Neptunian transit, which is more of a spiritual crisis, the disillusion and transcendence of life's limits and boundaries, a collective sentiment and extreme that's coming more from the Trump side. And Hillary, who is very attuned to collective psyche and need, her chart being more of an implementer, and she'll need to do some transformation of her own if she is to be a driving force in this election. So let's do it. Sanders, Trump, and Clinton. So what I've done is gone ahead with all three charts and identified the sensitive structures within them. That is, those structures that tend to get sparked at important or pivotal events in their lives. And by identifying these and the kind of connections they're making now, it gives us a really good perspective on how the election might unfold for each individual candidate. So let's get started with Bernie Sanders. I can't stress the importance of two sensitive structures in Sanders' chart that are always present at major and pivotal events. Zeus Kronos Mercury, which is his powerful and creative mental leadership, and Jupiter Vulcanus Pluto, one of the most successful midpoint structures, all kinds of positive change and development, and the influential and expansive development of power. So leading up to the Democratic National Convention, Bernie Sanders' chart is in a mode of expansion and will continue to grow over the year. But the energy will really pinnacle midsummer around the convention. Sanders' chart is strong and will continue that trend as his sensitive structure, Jupiter Vulcanus Pluto, which is in powerful contact to his natal moon and his directed Poseidon. And these two planetary pictures just heighten in energy as we get closer to the convention in July. Now, what that means with both the moon and Poseidon is that Sanders will continue to exert powerful public influence, developing and building momentum while continuing to transmit his ideological concepts. This may or may not mean he's leading in the primaries, but rather that his influence will remain strong. Also building in strength over the next 6 months is his directed Aries point, which is the world axis, in connection to his natal Apollon point, which indicates widespread expansion. And with those meridian Jupiter, Vulcanus, Pluto structure here too, probably a lot of money funneling in over the next several months. Although his chart is still strong at election time, I'm a little bit less impressed with it. Sanders' November chart just doesn't contain a strong enough Zeus Kronos Mercury axis, an axis that has been so active in past election wins. And his chart also lacks a connection to the world axis that would show in this type of event. So the repeating theme in his chart over and over again is about this release of idealism and the inspiring of new growth, a generation of power and development and expansion. The Neptune-Jupiter transits of both his meridian and sun over the next 6 months continue these themes, and the Saturn transit, which is square, will be challenging but serve as impetus to keep building and do what is needed. So Sanders' Neptune transit in these situations generally tend to inflate or dissolve. Poof, and they're gone. My guess is that Sanders will be relevant as long as collective unconscious feelings are strong and there is a need for a mouthpiece, Sanders being their channel. So now we come to Donald Trump, and I did not do Ted Cruz's chart as there is some uncertainty as to a correct birth time on it, so I made the executive decision to just leave that one alone. But upon identifying the sensitive structures in Trump's chart, the ones that are active at major events, we find a collection of inflations, deflations, successes, and failures more than anything else. One of the most important structures is where 4 of the 6 personal points meet up, and it is the structure that casts the biggest shadow in his life. Sun, Moon, Meridian, Ascendant with Venus, Hades, Saturn, midpoint. Tremendous self-valuation issues. His uncertainty around his own inner value and worth, and his bottomless need for proof of value or love that serves as a motivation for everything that he does. The White House being the ultimate trophy of self-worth and, more poignantly, personal redemption. But this structure also sits on the nation's ascendant, and Neptune has been transiting this area for the past year and will continue through the election, stirring up and intensifying not only Trump's deepest unconscious feelings and longings, but the unconscious feelings and longings of an entire collective. Neptunian transits are crises of the spirit, and in this case, a collective spirit that has grown tired of rules, limits, and boundaries. Trump's ability to channel these archetypal images is his gift. And the Zeus, Kronos, Mars, Neptune with the Mercury meridian in Trump's chart is what enables him to do so, to channel the collective. An endless font of imagination that's nearly always operating, intuiting what others want him to be and then becoming that person. A profound ability to read an entire auditorium of people the way he can read an individual. Trump isn't popular because he channels collective fear and discontent. Donald Trump is popular because he captures the collective's desire to dissolve and transcend the limits of life's boundaries and just be who we are. Trump is having the time of his life using his outrageously creative skill set, and people like it. They want that kind of freedom in their own lives, and that is a universal feeling. No matter how abominable you think Trump is, there is a kernel in everyone that finds him oddly, offensively, and uncomfortably attractive. And so ramping up the next 6 months, we have a very prominent Sun direction to his ascendant, which is exact to the second during the Republican National Convention, which in my estimation means possibility that he'll be at the helm. Sun ascendant directions or progressions are like a coming out party. They're major life transitions yielding energy, vitality, recognition, and confidence. Moving out of that period and into November is where things really get interesting. On November 8th, his chart as a whole forms a 22.5-degree aspect to itself, similar to a quarter turn of a dial. And this 22-degree aspect symbolizes action. It's both motivating and challenging, but the direction it'll go will be dependent on Trump's own inner evolution and development. But he does have a strong direction of Pluto to Jupiter, which is excellent for personal growth and development, as well as connections to the world axis on election day, chiefly a moon volcanus meridian, which is a structure of tremendous public and political influence. But the curious thing here is that this moon volcanus meridian structure, which really starts around convention time, is also tied in with his Neptune-Pluto midpoint structure, which is exact at convention time. And this means that there's both an intense mystical air that surrounds Trump, but that there's also possibly deep, imperceptible changes going on. So again, similar to Sanders, Neptune transits either inflate or dissolve because they're so rooted in unconscious feelings, both Trump's and the collective's. Will he win the election? His chart is slightly favorable, and he does have a strong world axis and world axis connections. He could possibly keep inflating up to the election, and then poof, he's gone. Just like your typical Neptunian transit, creating a lot of projection until it's no longer needed. Okay, Hillary Clinton's chart. Same deal in finding those sensitive structures at major events in her life. So let's get started. And we have a Mars-Pluto's Aries structure, which is the midpoint for a civil servant, but it's also someone who is ambitious, strong-willed, and very skilled at developing, building, and changing things. The Sun Meridian Aries structure can be a very public figure, and it also represents how one works and deals in the world, as well as their opportunities out in the world. So a little background on a chart I know very well. Hillary is someone with an extraordinary, deep understanding of the collective unconscious psyche combined with a powerful need to implement collective needs. But internal issues around valuation and the right use of will and power have impeded her for much of her political career. So the reason why I wanted to review that point is because it appears that Hillary has personally gone through some tremendous internal changes over the past few years with the transit of Neptune to her meridian around the time of Benghazi and the subsequent resignation as Secretary of State, a time when she was probably feeling tremendous discontent around what she was doing and the parts of herself that have stood in the way from a deeper connect with herself and then by default, the collective. And so what is currently consolidating in her chart that will remain active for another few months is a monster combination. Sun directed to Neptune, Uranus directed to her meridian, and meridian directed to her Mars. This is not only a deeply intuitive combination, tuning her into the collective psyche like a radio tower, but it also signifies tremendous vision, the need to assert, and an abundance of energy needed to harness the collective psyche into workable goals and objectives. So this tri-structure is probably operating more internally right now as she gathers steam by taking stock of collective needs and the lay of the political land. So I was really curious about this exact structure and what was going on. The only other time it was exact like this in her life, which was 45 years ago in 1968. So I Googled it and came across this Times article written in 2007 where she was apparently immersed in a very similar transformative process as she is right now. In the turmoil of 68, Clinton found a new voice. Mark Leibovich writes, as the nation boiled over Vietnam, civil rights in the slangs of two charismatic leaders, Ms. Rodden was completing a sweeping intellectual, political, and stylistic shift. Hillary goes on to say, there was a sense of tremendous change internationally and here at home which impacted greatly how I thought about things. And many of Hillary's handwritten remarks from that year are still on file at Wellesley, as she wrote, gaining power is at the core of effective activism. It is the very essence of life, the dynamo of life. She was not an anti-war radical trying to create a mass movement, said her friend Ellen Dubois. She was very much committed to working within the political system. From a student activist perspective, there was a significant difference. She arrived at Wellesley in 1964 as a Republican Goldwater girl and left as class president and an anti-war Democrat whose graduation speech won her Time magazine's Voice of a Generation. So returning to Hillary's chart in the here and now, as these three areas subside in energy over the next few months, she's got a locomotive train getting revved up that will slowly creep and take her up to the election. The directed meridian to Mars-Pluto, which is a tremendous drive to go beyond limitations and initiate new situations with possible and much needed rework around the expression of the masculine in her chart, and moving to a meridian Pluto direction around convention time, indicating a profound release of personal power into the career. And then her meridian lands exactly at election time on the Aries point or world axis, and that is huge. When something connects to the world axis, we will be seen and have impact in the world. Of all three candidates here, Hillary's chart has hands down the most powerful placements on election day. The only other time that Mars-Pluto Aries and the meridian like this came together was the day her husband was elected 42nd president of the United States. What I don't think is that all of these planetary directions she'll be having between now and election time will be easy. Their square, which is in astrology, is a very challenging aspect, indicating a lot of stress and resistance. But equally as strong will be the desire to overcome the obstacles and tackle problems. So with a chart like Hillary's, we're dealing with a different kind of candidate than a Trump or Sanders, and that Hillary is not an idealist. She has no ideology. Hillary is an implementer who will most likely strategize a political run like a locomotive train, grounded, intense, forward-moving based on her reading of the collective psyche and need. If she can harness and tap into what both Sanders and Trump are channeling and convince people that she is the one to move and implement the collective current, then she will very likely win this election. But more than anything, she needs to come from heart, with a positive expression of both her feminine and masculine. So Sanders and Trump's charts are both strong. They are necessary and invaluable pieces to this transformative time. Hillary, well, she's an implementer, but we'll have to wait and see if she can harness and swim the transition while moving the collective forward. So that's it. That's what the lay of the land looks like. So stay tuned for my next video, which will take me wherever this incredible time in our history goes. And if I'm open to suggestions, so if you want to connect with me, you can do so at theuranianastrologer.com.